Hello, I'm Lindsay O'Dell. I'm Director of the Graduate School at the Open University. In this short film, we're talking about researching online, so with research degree students who are, due to the current situation, undertaking their research remote from the campus. So I have students joining me today. It'd be great to hear if you could introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about how you were doing your research before the pandemic. Sarah, shall we start with you?
Okay, yeah. So before the pandemic, I was doing my research in a similar way to how I am now. So my field research was coming to an end, but I had a couple more interviews I had planned to do face to face, but because of the pandemic, I couldn't meet with these participants in person. So I did decide to do a couple over modern technology and via phone call. But I'd already had a mixture of interviews already online before. But I would say the biggest change was finding the relevance of my PhD in a crisis, a time of crisis. So I did do a few more interviews just to see how my key concepts and ideas of my research had changed or shifted because of the pandemic and crisis. And actually, what it reinforced is that what I had decided prior to the pandemic was relevant. So it shifted a bit, but also more how I approached the subject.
Thank you. That's really interesting. We might come back to some of those issues. To Anna.
Sure. So before the pandemic, the first year of the PhD, I spent it, let's say, I think it was 60% remotely from home and 40% on campus, where I would especially come to attend seminars. But that was also very helpful being on campus to meet other students. And this really helped me build a social base, kind of a foundation that has really helped it really helped in the following years. Um, so we can talk about this a bit later, maybe, but I would say that social element is the one that I think in a context of a pandemic or working remotely, we would all need to put a lot more emphasis on.
Thank you. So I think you've both started to answer the next question, which is absolutely fine. It's really not a problem because it's all kind of linked together, isn't it? So my next question is about how did the pandemic affect how you were doing your research? And if you want to think about, were there any specific adjustments that you had to make as a result of that? And any benefits, any opportunities that came about as a result of it?
So for me, I am in the because we've been in this pandemic for nearly 6 months now. So there's been a major shift with the first 3 months and then the last 3 months, and we don't know if we're going to go into this sort of semi-crisis again. So in the first sort of 3 months, obviously everybody's lives were greatly impacted on in different ways. So in a way, opportunities didn't really arise in that time for me because it was a case of just sort of getting by and dealing with the consequences of COVID. Whereas when for me, I used it as an opportunity of how can I do my PhD in a time of crisis, because whatever happens, I still don't want my end goal to not achieve it. I'm still here to deliver and do the PhD. So what I thought about, how can I get back into it? And I looked at not working specifically on PhD tasks, but looking on tasks related to my PhD. So writing about my PhD in blog posts. So I wrote 2 blog posts, which I wouldn't have done. And then I also, like I said in my first question, I took the opportunity to consider my research further within this time and the impact of COVID on my participants. And I actually extended the study ever so slightly and conducted some follow-up interviews with my participants to look at the same research questions but in a different context, or in a more extreme context of COVID-19. And what that enabled me to do was develop my understanding of my original PhD while enabling me to get back into it and get back into that routine of actually sitting down and working. And from that, I presented that at 2 virtual conferences, which I never would have done because I wouldn't have been able to travel to these conferences. And I also wrote one up into a peer review publication, and I also spoke to a third sector organisation about my research and findings, just to help more and contribute in a way that I could contribute in a time of crisis. So that's kind of the opportunity, which it might have taken time for me to react to it, but that's how I did eventually react.
That's really interesting. That's great. I like the distinction between the first stage of kind of crisis, the first few months where we're all just kind of getting used to how we live in lockdown, and then what's happened subsequent to that and how we're kind of adjusting to a different way of working. That's really interesting. Thank you. Anna?
Yeah, in my case, I had completed data collection before the pandemic, so I was lucky in this sense that what I had to do after, it was transcription analysis and writing, which I was already doing working from home. So the main challenge was the social aspect, I guess, making an effort to make sure you keep connected to your fellow students or staff in your department, which it just requires a bit more of kind of proactivity, but actually everyone is in the same situation. So what I found also is, again, looking at it in terms of an opportunity, we're now at a phase where everyone's a lot more used to being online. We've established protocols of connecting in ways that seem less awkward. So I think if we look at it in a positive way, that's that's something to take into account as a positive. The other thing I would say is, in terms of research methods, I was not affected because I had already done the data collection. However, one of the methods I did use was an online method using mobile phone technology. So what I found, again, as an opportunity is that then there's been more interest in methods like this one, which have already been taking place for a long time. And there's already a lot of literature in online research methods and digital ethnography, etc., depending on the discipline. So again, if we look at it in terms of an opportunity, there's an array of literature and support in conducting research online. Again, I guess the difficult stage would be bonding with the participants, accessing the field site, depending on the topic and discipline, might be a bit more challenging online, but there's also opportunities in this sense. So yeah, that's what I found in my case, that the method I used alongside other offline face-to-face methods became actually even more relevant beyond my study.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And yeah, I know that we really enjoyed your lecture, Anna, as part of the Research in Lockdown series. The resurgence of interest around online methodologies, I think, is really fascinating. So either people like you who were doing it before, sharing their expertise, or others who are thinking about how to move things online that they'd not thought about before, I think is really interesting. It can be really hard, and not to underestimate, how difficult it was for all of us when we first kind of moved into lockdown. But academics are nothing if they're not creative, are they? So able to do other things and think about things in other ways. That's really helpful and really interesting. My next question is for you to think about students who are starting their studies, and what tips you would have for them based on your experience over the last kind of 6 months or so studying remotely. What tips might you have for them in general about how to start their studies remotely, or specifically about any aspect of their studies, like we've talked about developing a sense of community in their faculty or in their research community or with other students and so on, or their relationship with their supervisors. So tips and suggestions, please.
I think for me, the biggest priority would be the social aspect of it, building this community, as you were saying, Lindsay. Because I was lucky the first year of my PhD, it was pre-pandemic, so I had the opportunity to meet a lot of people through the seminars and have coffees and lunches in campus, which was really nice and really helps you feel part of the OU community. But at the same time, as I said earlier, we're all getting used to being online now, and we all need this bonding. So I think everyone's seeking for connecting. It's not that one would be the only one and feel strange to ask for a call. So I think my advice would be to be proactive in seeking the social connection. There's also been a lot more webinars and online conferences and all sorts of online events. And sometimes online it feels easier to say, I don't have time to connect, actually I need to finish this bit of work, because you haven't made the effort to go there in person. So my advice would be actually to make the effort to click the link, because it's a lot easier with an internet connection, and just make sure to attend these events and webinars, because they do help in getting to know people, sharing your work. You can then approach others via email one-to-one and build these relationships, and learn from others and let others know your work as well. And then a third tip would be, which I did have to deal with, is self-care when you don't have this social aspect or this opportunity to get out so much. Although I found it relatively easy to continue my work from home, doing analysis transcription, I had no reasons to go out because the activities I used to do, I couldn't do anymore. So I had to be more proactive in making sure I took my time for walks, for runs, or for whatever helps everyone to just maintain a good, mental and physical well-being, and separate work from other breaks or other activities. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I would agree with everything you've just said. And another bit of advice I would say is that take responsibility for building those social networks and don't maybe expect somebody else to do it. I found it really helpful to connect with other PhD students and academics, not just at the OU. And I do online study sessions with them where we all dial in and we do timed working sessions together in silence and then have a little break. And actually there are some run by academics, and they're usually quite open to PhD students joining them. My other advice would be is to also, I would agree with you, turn up to the online seminars and in and outside the university. And one thing I have noticed about my experience of being a PhD student at the OU and attending seminars virtually online as well as in person is how supportive, especially in my department, social policy and criminology, how supportive academics are of each other when you ask a question in the seminar or type a question. And I think everybody just wants to get on quite well. So I'll just say take the opportunities. But also, if you can, have a space which is your PhD space. And if you don't have a space, have a drawer where you can put it away and shut the drawer and don't look at it, in the evening if that's not when you're working, and turn off your phone if you can, because I don't know about how you guys experienced the current climate, but I felt that I got so many more texts and so many more messages and calls because at the beginning of lockdown, I found it was a lot more social contact than I was actually used to. So it was adjusting in a different way from what I expected. I felt even more connected in some ways, which is a bit weird, but it's how it felt.
Definitely. And if I can add one more thing on access to resources, because I can see this could be a concern for anyone starting a research project on accessing libraries and materials. I would say the OU has an excellent support team everywhere in the departments, in the library. So as Sarah said, just be proactive in seeking this advice and this support, but also externally using online networks like Twitter, for example, to contact academics that you might want to ask for a paper from if you cannot get it, or just, I think being proactive, as Sarah said before, in seeking support and resources.
Yeah, I would definitely with the papers, because obviously the library can get in any books and papers that they don't currently have access to, but journal, when an academic publishes a journal article, they don't actually get paid for it. The pay goes straight to the publisher, so they're usually more than willing just to send you a copy of it for reference.
That's excellent. Thank you. Yeah, those the sessions of things like Shut Up and Write, which sounds similar to the timed sessions. I think, Sarah, you were talking about the library runs some of those in the OU. They can be really helpful. We also have, I don't know, Anna and Sarah, if you know about this, there are lots of resources in the university for PGRs, postgraduate research students, that we offer remotely. Because the OU is so used to providing support for everybody online, we have things like, we have virtual coffee mornings, and we have a virtual hangout in the common room. So coffee mornings on a Thursday morning, and hangout in the common room on Tuesday evenings. It used to be Takeaway Tuesday, and I think now it's morphed into something slightly different. So they were all excellent suggestions. Can I pick you up on a couple of those specifically? So what tips and advice would you have to students who are going to start their studies remotely from the campus about beginning a kind of relationship with supervisors? How has supervision worked for you remotely?
For me, it's worked quite well. I'd say the biggest challenge is making sure we're all available, just because I'm coordinating. I had 3 supervisors, so we have a method of coordinating our diaries, but also having an agenda, but also leaving a bit of time for a chat before or after, just as a warm up. It's a strange time for us all, and actually working remotely might actually give people more flexibility. So concerns about transferring to online, I don't think they should have any, and maybe it will be easier because there might be less travel involved, because obviously not everybody lives around Milton Keynes, and obviously can't travel. So I don't know if that's a tip or if that's useful, but I wouldn't worry about it. Just, make sure you put it in your diary. It's in their diary as an invite, and yeah, you'll be fine. It'll be fine.
Yes, I agree with Sarah on being proactive and quite methodical with the meetings. So, as Sarah said, I also always used to send an agenda and schedule the meeting. Just keep doing the same thing, or start doing that from the start if you are starting a research degree now. Being proactive in scheduling these meetings in everyone's calendars and sending an agenda. And yeah, very importantly, I agree, having this time for just more of an informal chat, which you would have if you met face to face. So just ensure you do the same when you meet online, because everyone it's in the same situation. So it's just nice to build this rapport, not only go straight to the point in the agenda and to work, but actually build this connection and be at ease with each other and get to know each other.
I'd also say schedule time in before and after, just to kind of, so you can digest what you've said or what they've said and taking it all in, because maybe when it's virtual there's a tendency to go a bit quicker. So in a room you can see when someone's pausing to take notes, or you might have cues that you might not pick up on. So just don't worry about saying, oh, can we just pause while I take notes, or can we go back over a point. Treat it and use it as it is, and yeah, that would be a tip.
That's a great tip, thank you. No, that's all been really helpful. Sarah, you'd mentioned something, and it's not one of our questions, but actually, if you don't mind, you don't have to answer, but Sarah, you talked about your workspace and being able to put it away. So I wondered if there was anything around that. So any tips for new students starting their studies where they're working at home, where they might have expected to be in a student office, about how to work at home?
Yeah, so I'm very lucky because I have an office space, but not everybody's going to have that. So I would, if you can get a desk or a kitchen table, that is the best thing to be able to do, to try and set it up as similar to an office. But if you can't, like, do think as simply as a drawer or a shoebox or anything, just or a shelf space, just to keep everything in one place. So then it keeps organised, and it's as clear a distinction between work and home as you can possibly make. But I would also advise that with technology as well. So with your university emails, maybe don't put them on your phone, because you can check them when you're at uni, at work. I know it is a studentship and it is a PhD, but to an extent it might still be your 9 to 5 job. And if it's not your 9 to 5 job and you're doing it when you're working in full time or part time, then you would have set aside some hours to work on it. And it's better to be in the room with your PhD than always have it halfway there, because you want to have a good relationship with it. And if it's everywhere, it might not be as productive. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm trying to, it's okay to put your PhD work away, is what I'm trying to say.
That's a really good point. Anna, anything to add?
I agree. I do not have an office specifically for my PhD work or work in my flat. So yeah, I do the same thing. I work on my kind of dining table, but I always put it away when I'm done or when I have to have meals or when it's not working time, because it just helps to separate things and ensure when you're on a break, and it's your right and responsibility to do other things so that you can recover and have fun and then go back to PhD fun. But yeah, I think it does help to physically separate things and keep things in a drawer as well, or and take them out when it's the right time.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you said fun and then PhD fun.
Yes, exactly, because it is fun too. It's just about a different type of fun.
I noticed that too as well. I was like, it is a real pleasure to be able to do a PhD full time. It is. So it is important to stop doing it sometimes as well, because in those breaks it's when all the good, where you connect the dots and where the thoughts come. Sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's great. Anything else, Sarah or Anna, that you wanted to add? I think the conversation's been really lovely, and I think will be really helpful for students. But anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I would just say be kind to yourself as a PhD student, because it's really easy to be your biggest critic, because obviously you're learning and you're developing, and a PhD is a study at a higher level. So it is a new way of working in this current climate, and sometimes it won't work what you're doing, and some things will go wrong, and that's actually okay, and that would happen regardless of the pandemic. So it's just to be aware of that, and also maybe record those days when you're working and when you're not working, and what you've achieved and what you didn't achieve, and maybe why, because we don't know what might happen, but we need to keep our supervisors informed and we need to keep the university informed. So just to in some ways this will be business as normal going forward, and we do need to adapt to work in this environment, but in other ways it might not be. So just to be aware of that and not be too hard on yourself, really, would be something I would like to add. Yeah, but work. Do the PhD still, because you've got to get it done.
Yes, and I would highlight again what you were saying, Lindsay. Reassure everyone that the OU is an organization that has so much experience, all the experience in online teaching, online community building. I was just thinking as we were talking that all the seminars I attended in person were also being streamed online live before the pandemic. So yeah, there's a lot of resources and support to help you do your research, whether there's a pandemic or not, remotely or not. So I wouldn't worry and just be proactive. Yeah.
If you've got Facebook, I'm like a member of a couple of different Facebook groups, some within the university, some out of the university, but there is a whole host of PhD community groups online, which are a wonderful informal resource, which I've used throughout my studies, even for advice, tips, references, clarification on something. If I can't, if it's a question I don't necessarily want to take to the uni or my supervisors.
Okay, thank you very much.